Hi everyone. So in this follow-up video for the multi-tenancy add-on, what we need to do is basically to look at the test, because this is the stuff that we left out last time. And as you can already see, the pull request that I did last time is actually not working. So probably there's an error in the test. And if we run all this tests, then actually there's one test case that is failing, which is given valid product with category, like it is in this product storage test class, and then it tries to store the product with an association to a category, and then it tries to load the product category back, and checks that they are actually matching. I digged a little bit into this failing error or in this failing test case before the video, and it turns out that this is actually a bug in this Jmix multi-tenancy add-on, which does not cause any problem right now for us, because it only happens when in the test case and also in the production code there is no tenant associated, and this is what we currently have in place, because we don't run these tests as a particular tenant, but instead just run them as a root administrator, whatever. And this is actually something that we can fix anyways, because what we want to have is that our test more and more really mirror our actual use cases and the situations that the users actually see. So let's take a look on how to fix these tests, or like this one, and then also potentially all the others, improve them a little bit as well. So one thing that I had in mind is to create a particular bean. Let's just call it multi-tenancy. And this multi-tenancy is basically takes care of all the logic that is needed in order to interact with this. Basically it's about setting up a test and tenant, and then also a test user, and then start the test case as this particular user. And before we actually implement that logic, I wanted to show you one additional thing. So there is a mechanism in JUnit 5 which allows you to basically register particular extensions, so that we don't have to do in every test case, like sets up something in the setup phase and then in the teardown phase clean it up again. So what we can do is we can go ahead and create another Java class which we call tenant user environment, for example. And this class basically implements a couple of things from JUnit, which is before each callback and after each callback. And this basically gives you two hook methods, which are basically called similar to the annotation here. And within this callbacks, we can basically perform some actions and then just annotate our test cases with this particular extension here. So what we can do is, there's one thing which allows us to get the Spring context, and there's Spring extension, and we can get the application context from it. And then what we can say is get bean, and here we can load our new multi-tenancy class. And what we can do is basically, for example, here having this method called multi-tenancy start, or we could also perhaps call it setup or something, where we basically create this initial tenant, and then also the user, and so on and so forth. So probably it's a good idea to actually store that as a field in this class, so that after the fact we can say MultiTenancy End, which is basically just removing, I don't know, let's say cleaning up the screens, or perhaps even removing the tenant or something like this. Okay, so for now, this does not really do any logic, but perhaps we can already take a look on how to use that. So one thing that we could do, for example, is just do it like this and make a breakpoint here, and then we can actually annotate our new test case or our existing breaking test case with this new extension. And this in JUnit works like this. You can just say extends with, and then you can pass in the class name tenant user environment class. And if we now run this test, then hopefully we should see that our breakpoint actually hits, and with that we see that we can now inject particular logic. So here you can see that this is actually working, and if we go into this one, so this was actually the other way around. Actually, what we have to do is do it like this. So this is because this is before each, and this is after each method or after each test case. So let's fix it like this. But as you can see, we now have this particular context in place and can actually start working in there. So there's a little bit to do in this multi-tenancy class, and I will not go ahead and implement all of this here right now because it's just a little bit of boilerplate code. So let me just copy the predefined solution one by one, and then we can go through it and what it actually does. So first of all, what we need here is we need a couple of dependencies, which is in particular data manager and the system authenticator. And since this is a bean as well, we can just add them similarly to just a regular dependency. If I would do auto wired or whatever, this would be the same thing. But in this case, I will just create a constructor and assign those values here to the fields, and this actually works exactly as if I would have done the add auto wired annotation. But what we then additionally can do is to say that we would like to store a particular reference to a user and to a tenant. So this would be my user class. And now we don't have them yet initialized. So what we can do is we can go in the constructor and basically initialize the tenant. Literally like setting up the object and storing it into the database. And then the second thing is that we create a user for this tenant. And so let's take a look on what this is actually doing. So I will just take over these two methods here so that you can already take a look. So first of all, init tenant will create basically a tenant object, and it will save this into the database, and we run that as with system privileges. And here, the create tenant method just creates a tenant with a unique identifier. Here it's just a unique string. I can also copy over this method, and it basically gives us a unique tenant with a unique tenant name, and then it stores that accordingly here. And then the second thing is that we would want to create a user for this particular tenant. So let's look at how to pull this off. So this method here basically takes a tenant and a user role that this user should be assigned with. And then the first thing is we create a user object and store it into the database. I know that this actually happens here, but we just create this particular user. We can also take a look at this method. So this also just gives takes the tenant information and references the tenant identifier. And here we actually need to do that explicitly because we run that in the context of this system account. So this means this system account does not have any tenant associated that would automatically, for example, inject it into this value. But here we do that manually. And yeah, so then we have created the user. And the second thing is that we create the role assignment for this particular user with the given role code that we have. So let's take this one in here as well. So this role assignment entity comes from Jmix itself, and yeah, it should be a resource role, and we just pass in this role code as a dedicated attribute, and then we store both of them, the user and the role association. And afterwards, we just reload the user, and then we can return this one here to this user object. And this will be our full access role that we want to assign to this user, because we do not really, for now, need to any fine-grained role system or something. Yeah, with that in place, then like at the time where the bean is created, we have now automatically created a tenant and also created a user. And one thing that is of importance here is that we need to configure this bean to not be a regular single bean anymore. So the reason why I do that here is because I want to store those two attributes here in the in this object itself, and by default Spring only creates singleton beans, meaning that only one of them actually exists in the Spring context. So we can change that by say this using the scope annotation here, and say this will be a prototype. And with that, actually, whenever there's an injection into a particular bean, then a new instance of this multi-tenancy class will be created. So this is a mechanism of Spring itself. And with that, we basically can have multiple users and multiple tenants and so on and so forth. So perhaps at the end, in order to make it a little bit more accessible for our users, for our application tests, we can create getters for these two attributes here, so that in case we need that in some in some context, then we can actually reference that. And then the last thing is now only to think about what to do here in this setup and in this end method, because this is what we set up, what we call in the before each and after each method. And the only thing that we actually need to do is to basically start our current authentication context as this particular user that we just stored. So if we go ahead and say system authenticator begin, and then we can pass in the username, then this bean will actually set up everything so that we are acting as this particular user. And then at the end there's also system authenticator end, and it will just basically stop this authentication context. Okay, and now with that, actually before each we have created our bean, and then call the setup method, and after each test we basically say that the multi-tenancy selection should actually end. So with that in place, we can actually try to rerun this test case here and see if it now works, and this would prove that this error that occurs before is actually just a bug in the current version. Okay, and the reason why this is not yet working is because if you look at our test case, we actually still right now run this as system context. And this is actually what we have to get rid of, because with this annotation here, we configured it to actually run as a particular user. But if we now store our objects once again in the system context, then this will basically be exactly the same as we have done it before. So this means we actually have to simplify our test case here. So wherever we use the system authenticator action, actually I can just get rid of this dependency, and then we can take a look at the errors. So basically we need to refactor it a little bit to this particular style here to just get rid of this system authenticator completely. And actually probably we can even get rid of this one here. No, this is returning an optional, so yeah, then let's do it like this. Okay, here we can also use the direct variant, and this can actually then be an inline parameter or variable. So let's rerun that and see if this now works. Okay, and as you can see now, the test is actually working. So this means we have now correctly assumed a particular user in the test context here, and actually act as this user. And the beauty of it is, first of all, that it actually reduces the noise in the test case, because you can just interact with the data manager as you would do in a normal scenario and not use the system authenticator always. And then there's a second interesting aspect, is this database cleanup here. So right now we have to remove all the data from the corresponding tables in order to not clean or mess up the tests. That you have the first test creates a product, and then the second test relies on the fact that there's no product present yet. If we at each test case generate a new tenant and a new user, and just assume this context, then basically we should have a blank database from this respect, because the multi-tenancy add-on is exactly for this case, that each new tenant doesn't see the data of another tenant. So this means we can actually get rid of this database cleanup altogether, because we run that as part of every test, and the data will then be actually present in the database, but it will just be a different tenant, and therefore it is actually not really relevant for us anymore. So let me just go ahead here, and we can just skip through the test and see where we actually need that. So here we now have it fixed. So this is just for validation, so there's no database interaction actually. The same goes for this one. Yeah, and then for the UI, we can actually also put that in to this particular superclass here. And with that, we can also then just go ahead and get rid of these these database cleanup parts. So the same goes for this. Okay, here we have another one of those. So I think with that we should have almost all of them. Yeah, it might be that we actually have it for the customer as well. Yeah, exactly here. All right, so then let's just do it like this. So if we now rerun all the tests to see if everything is still fine, then first of all, we see that we did not break anything by introducing the multi-tenancy add-on. But secondly, now with our multi-tenancy JUnit extension, we actually run as basically we are leveraging in the test already the multi-tenancy add-on, and we through our code see that everything still works, and even like the logic of this multi-tenancy add-on still works, because we, for example, don't have messy test data sitting all around. So with that, I think we have now finished this particular problem of the test cases. So all right, so if we now go ahead here once again and wait for our CI system to run, then it should actually say this works, and then we can finish our work for this particular issue. What we have not done yet is to create a test case that actually very explicitly checks that the multi-tenancy functionality works. So for example, what I could imagine is to say, first of all, we create, so when it comes, for example, to product storage, we could say, that as a system administrator, we create a particular product, and then it is not visible to the first tenant, or we just create two tenants, and then in the first tenant we create one thing, and then we load all the data in the second tenant and see that there's actually no data in there. So with that, we would make it a little bit more explicit compared to the situation that we have right now. Yeah, and since all of our entities, so if we look once again at our product, last time we stopped at the standard tenant entity, so I just now fixed that here by extending the standard entity and just adding this this tenant annotation here, this tenant ID annotation, and then this column. So this means that basically we would have to check that this product is actually a standard tenant entity and is not just a regular entity which could share the data between the tenants. So with that, it's actually might make sense to write dedicated test case to verify that. Yeah, but I think for now we can close that off. I will just merge this pull request later, and then I think we are done with the story. Thank you very much for watching, and then see you next time.